All right, so welcome back. So in this part, we're going to talk about our nails, and then we'll wrap our discussion and our lecture on the integumentary system. So when we look at our nails, we know that we have nails associated with our digits on both our hands and our feet. So the digits there being the fingers and the toes, and we have different parts to the nail, right? And so the nail in general, the nail protects the tip of the digit. um, we have a region called the nail matrix, just like we had a region called the hair root matrix or the hair matrix. We also have one called the nail matrix, and it's essentially kind of the same thing. It's a similar structure and a similar region in that it is giving rise to new cells that are being pushed out and being pushed out toward the tip of the nail to contribute to nail growth, right? So this is where we have nerves, blood vessels, and lymphatics, just like we have um, with the hair. All right. We also have a region called the eponychium or the eponychium. This is also referred to as the cuticle, right? So this is this fold of skin that's going to protect the nail matrix toward the proximal end of the nail, right? So we all know what our cuticle is, this little band of skin here. This is protecting the nail matrix that sits just posterior and just deep to that. All right. Now we also have a region called the lunula, right? And so the term lunula is from the term lunar, which means moon. Okay. And so this structure, the anatomist that named this thought that this looked like a moon, and it kind of looks like a half. A half moon if you kind of look at it. Now, if you look at it on your own finger, you notice that it's white, right? And so the reason that it's white is because of a lack of blood vessels in this area, and the thickness of the lunula that kind of obscures any blood vessels that may be present. Okay, so you get this nice white color. If you look just distal to that, you look just distal to the lunula, you notice that your nails are a reddish pink color, right? And so the reason the nails are this reddish pink color is because you have a very extensive blood supply on the underside of your nail, right? If you've ever slammed your finger into a door, if you've ever dropped a heavy object or a heavy weight on it, you know that you get this nice blood collection, this nice blood blister kind of underneath the nail, right? And then your nail may eventually fall off, okay, due to the physical trauma and maybe due to disrupting part of the nail matrix, right? And then we have a region called the nail bed. Okay, so the nail bed is what sits just beneath this other region called the nail plate. So the nail plate is essentially the nail that we think of when we look down and look at our nails. We're looking at the nail plate. Um, and what that nail plate lies on top of is this nail bed. And in the nail bed is where we have our capillaries that give the nails that give the nail their color. Okay. All right. So if we look here, we know that nails, we kind of typically think of nails and we don't really think a whole lot about nails. We don't really, think of them as being clinically significant in any way, but it turns out they can actually be very significant. All right. So this is a picture of clubbing. Okay. So this is a picture of clubbing. All right. I'm just kidding. This isn't clubbing. This is Sylvester Stallone, perhaps at a club. All right. But what I'm talking about is this. Okay. So this is nail clubbing. Right. And so obviously when you look at this, you notice that the these digits, these nails are not normal. Okay. So nail clubbing is when you get this kind of distension and this kind of swollen appearance to the nail. All right. You can see another image here, and you can see this image here. All right. So nail clubbing can indicate a pathology. It can indicate some type of issue with our body. Typically, it can be associated with respiratory issues. So if you're having prolonged lack of oxygenation, but it can also indicate things like cancers and things like this as well. Okay. So what you can look at is you can look at the angle between or the shape of this little window at the kind of proximal end of your nails. So if you look at this image here, you notice that you can put your two nails, so two fingers of the same, so maybe both of your second digits, so both of your index fingers, put them together where the nails are touching, and you get this nice little kind of diamond shaped window at the top, and you should be able to see through that, right? So on this image to the left, you can see through the other side. When you look at this one, you notice that the border of the nail and the skin is increased, and you have this thickness here. Okay, and so this obscures this window, and so this is called a Shamroth's sign. Okay, Shamroth sign, and it is um, uh, it is when you press the two kind of proximal regions of the nail together, and you do not see that window. All right. You can also look at the profile of the finger and the nail, and you see that here, if you have this kind of um, decreased angle, this 160-degree angle, this is more or less normal, right, without the shamrock sign. And then here, this is when you have an increased angle, all right? And so greater than 180 degrees, this would indicate clubbing. And you can also just notice that the nail is kind of more bulbous, more swollen in this right image than you see in the left image. So this is something you can pick up on clinically when you do a simple um, uh, whole body assessment on a patient. You can look at their skin, but you can also look at their nails and see if they have any clubbing going on. Okay. All right. Now, we'll also talk about some different glands associated with our integumentary system, right? So we'll talk about oil glands, sebaceous glands, and some other things, all right? So when we look at sebaceous glands secrete sebum, and sebum is what we think of as oil, right? So when we get oily skin, when we get oily hair, this is a result of the production of sebum that then goes into the hair follicle, and then from the hair follicle, it can go into the or onto the surface of the hair itself, right? So sebum helps to protect the skin, helps to protect the hair, helps to protect and prevent the loss of water, and so through via evaporation. It also has antimicrobial properties as well, so it can help prevent a development of bacteria growing. And the way that we secrete sebum is through holocrine secretion. Okay, holocrine secretion. So we discussed this when we did our histology lecture, when we looked at exocrine glands. But holocrine secretion is when the cell itself bursts and lyses and ruptures as it's releasing its product, right? So you can see here these little molecules, these red molecules are representing, sebum, representing oil, and the whole cell has bursted has burst in order to release the sebum into the hair follicle. So here's a sebaceous gland here on the left, here's one on the right, and then here's the associated hair follicle where you're releasing that sebum into, and then it can work its way up onto the hair. All right. Okay. So we can also know, and we can think about that you have sebum associated with the development of acne, right? And so here you can see a normal, healthy follicle, sebaceous gland on either side, secreting oil into the into the hair follicle. Here you can see now this duct that's leading up the hair follicle and ultimately into um, or up onto the surface of the hair. It has become clogged in some way. So maybe there's dead cells. Maybe sebum itself is starting to accumulate and aggregate there. Maybe we have dirt that has gotten into the follicle, and this forms a plug, and this clogs the hair follicle. All right. You continue to produce sebum. As you produce sebum, you can have a development of bacteria here. It can become inflamed, it can become red, and then it can begin to fill with pus, right? And this is when we form some type of acne, right? So some type of pimple, some type of issue with the skin, right? And so this is why, proper hygiene, washing the skin, washing your face with soap and whatnot. This is why it's important because it prevents things like this from happening. Now, I say it prevents. It doesn't fully prevent this phenomena from happening, right? So you can still wash your face and you can still get acne, especially during puberty, because you're going to have different hormones begin to be released. That's going to stimulate more oil to be produced, and so you get this natural development of pimples and acne and things like that. But it's still a good practice in order to prevent it from getting worse is to consistently and effectively wash your skin to prevent things like this from happening. Okay, so those are sebaceous glands, oil glands. The next two we'll talk about are sudoriferous glands, which just means sweat gland. All right, and we have two types. We have apocrine and we have merocrine. Merocrine is sometimes also called eccrine, and we'll talk about those. All right, so apocrine, this is we find these in places like the pubic and genital regions as well as the armpits, so the axillary regions. Right, they produce sweat that goes directly into a hair follicle. So just like the oil we talked about previously goes directly into the hair follicle, apocrine sweat glands also secrete the sweat into a hair follicle. And these are associated with the smell that we think of sweat having, right? And so it's not the sweat that is smelling that produces an odor, but it's the bacteria that um, that feed on the sweat that then begin to produce the odor. Okay, and so this is why we associate the sweat in areas like the armpit, the axillary region, to be associated with bad smells. Okay, and then the second type is merocrine. Secretion, okay, or merocrine sweat glands. These produce sweat that does not go directly into the hair follicle, but instead goes directly onto the skin surface. So there are pores, sweat pores from sweat glands, merocrine sweat glands, that go directly onto the skin surface, and the sweat goes directly there. Okay, so these are the sweat glands that are involved with the process of thermoregulation, so helping to cool the body down when the body temperature increases, and these are not necessarily associated um, with the odor that we think of sweat being associated with. All right. So whenever you've been outside, it's been hot, you've been exercising or running or doing some type of physical activity, and you notice you have that sweat over your hands, over your skin. This is a product of merocrine sweat glands, sometimes called eccrine sweat glands. All right. Okay, so here you can see the different products that secrete their product, the different glands that secrete their product into the hair follicle directly. So that's going to be the apocrine sweat glands that we just talked about, as well as the sebaceous glands, so the oil glands. Remember, the merocrine sweat glands or the eccrine sweat glands secrete their product directly onto the skin surface and not into the hair follicle first. Okay. All right. So the last thing we'll talk about here is the effect of aging on the skin, right? And so as we age, as we increase in age, we know that we can have many things change, many things go wrong. And one thing that can happen is we can have changes in our skin, right? So just by a simple look at the image that you can see on the screen, you notice that from a child, so an infant or a baby, to maybe somebody middle-aged, to somebody a little bit older, you see changes in the hand, right? So we typically refer to baby skin as being, extremely soft to the touch, very smooth. And then when you get older in age, you typically think of things like wrinkles, and the skin is tough, and there may be scars, and it's not quite as soft, and things like that, right? This is simply an effect of the aging process, right? So as we age, cells stop dividing as rapidly, and so our skin can get thinner, right? So this means that it can tear more easily, right? So we're more likely to have tears in the skin. You may have heard, certain older adults with extremely thin skin can tear their skin just by, brushing up against something, brushing up against a wall or a cabinet or something like that. Okay. The collagen in the skin decreases as well, so we get the decrease in the skin's firmness, right? So the skin appears to be more loose, right? We also see the elasticity go down. So you can pinch the back of your hand and you can see it tint, and then you can see it go down. This has to do with hydration. This has to do with the elastic fibers in the skin, and so we lose that as we age, and so we get the development of wrinkles, right? So you can compare the baby's hand to this maybe middle-aged hand versus an elderly hand, and you can see that the elderly hand has far more wrinkles than than the middle-aged man, and the middle-aged hand, and then this middle-aged hand has perhaps more than the baby's. Okay. As we age, we also, just by nature of living longer, we've been exposed to the UV radiation from the sun for a longer amount of time. And so you have an increased risk for skin cancer as you age. You also have a decrease in the number of melanocytes that are produced. And so this increases your risk for sunburn. The melanin helps to protect against the UV radiation, so that itself can also put you at risk for developing cancer as well. And then we know that our hair can thin, so you may lose your hair, along with the loss of melanocytes contributing to, developing a sunburn more easily and potentially developing cancer. You also may have changes in the color of the hair, right? So we typically think of older individuals having more kind of gray to white colored hair, and this has to do with the change in the number of melanocytes and the amount of melanin being produced by those melanocytes. Okay, you lose growth in nails. You can also lose the amount of secretions from different glands, so sweat and oil. And so there's lots of things that can happen with the skin, with the accessory structures as we age. And when you think about how things slow down, cells stop dividing, cells stop working, fibers break, collagen and elastic fibers, a lot of these changes really do begin to make sense. All right. So that is the end of our integumentary system lecture. If you have any questions at all, please reach out and let me know. I'll be happy to answer, and I will see you in the next video.